Boutique. So welcome. Thanks everybody for coming. I know we occupy the dangerous space as like the last official thing of a conference, so happy to see everybody here. So when we were pitching around ideas of what to do, I think Tom and I spent enough time doing strange things in Google Sheets that we felt like it was worth sharing with a wider audience. And so we've got we're probably going to start off and just talk for a minute about why we tend to do so much stuff in Google Sheets, and then we'll get into some examples of some projects that we've done. And then hopefully, I think our goal today would be toward the end of this session would be to do a little bit of live building. So to show you all kind of how easy it is to get started using Google Sheets and Google Apps to kind of build out some really quick and disposable educational tools. So let's get rolling, and I've got a slew of solid Back to the Future memes. So why Google Sheets, and what does it bring as a benefit to our development process? And so one of the things that I think it helps us do really well, Jim mentioned almost boutique-like, and so we really try as much as we can to avoid building generic things for generic people. And so part of that means that we have to do things very quickly. And so we look for technologies that support rapid prototyping and making things that are going to be short-lived. So we don't want to invest 6 months in developing something that's going to be used during a course for 2 or 3 weeks. So, we're looking to make short-lived apps or prototypes in minutes or hours and not days or years. And so when we have some people come in and ask us, hey, can we do this? And we say, yeah, we can probably do it in Google Sheets. There's a lot of times where they'll walk into our open office hour sessions, which is from 12 to 2, and they've said, hey, we want to do this, and they leave with the thing right then. And if it's a little bit, more complicated, maybe we tinker with it and develop new patterns so that we can really speed up our development process for some of this stuff. So another reason that we really like Google Sheets, or Google, and by extension Google Apps, is that it really gives you coding superpowers, whether or not you really know what you're doing. And so if anybody had the chance to attend Keegan and John's presentation the other day on the Google Sheets CMS, that's a really great example of a technology like Google Sheets punching above its weight class and just being able to do some really awesome stuff with not a ton of work. And if you have any interest in broadening your professional development and learning some web development skills, Google Apps is a really gentle introduction to that. And so I think Tom and I were talking about this beforehand, and we both kind of realized, hey, without Google Apps, neither of us would be where we are in terms of programming ability. And this is definitely where I got started. And, so I can vaguely remember, 5 or 6 years ago, starting off with some of this stuff and learning how to do a for loop using Google Apps. And so, obviously we both widened our horizons then, but come from these kind of really humble beginnings. So definitely something worth considering, not necessarily something you have to do. I think we'll show you that it's fairly easy to do. There's great documentation available on Google Apps. So hopefully you can accomplish what you want without necessarily broadening your horizon. But if it's something you're interested in, this is definitely a good first step. Did we come up with a metaphor, Tom? We were searching for a clever metaphor, and so for this, and it's like, I don't know, I came up with like bowling with bumper lanes, but it's not really like that.
I was somewhere between a cookbook with a well-stocked kitchen. I mean, one of the beautiful things I like about Google Script and the environment is if you can get the first letter or two, it usually starts to autocomplete.
Yeah, autocomplete.
You can scroll down through it. And if you're like me, my memory's like hazy on names and stuff, so I'll be like A sometimes and then B and just see what comes as the autocomplete. So, I mean, like when you talk about like scaffolding and helping you figure this stuff out, it's absolutely the only reason I started to learn JavaScript, because I've been mainly doing PHP stuff. And then this was just such a low bar and so inviting in the terms of like how I could customize and how it tried to help me customize things really quickly.
And I think ultimately practical for me too. Like I could build something that people could use, where like when I started learning JavaScript in the browser, I'm like, well, I made this box yellow. Like nobody cares. So gives you superpowers whether you want to or not. So you can also once you get going, I think you have the ability to create some really powerful automations that end up saving you a lot of time. So I think in the lead into this, I said, maybe you're going to do this and Google Sheets of beer. So I figured there weren't any beer memes in Back to the Future, but we had this solid milkshake one. So yeah, maybe you can kick back a cold milkshake and let G Suite scripts save you hours of work. And like I said, we'll show you some examples of how we've done that and automated some of the super boring parts of our job so that we can focus on doing cooler stuff. And one of the most important reasons I think that you should consider this, whether for personal or professional growth, is there's a great community around Google Apps Script. Got a lot of people in this room in particular who've done a lot of stuff, written a lot of blog posts, and I think that this is a really interesting example. And so this is actually like Tom and I's first meeting regarding Google Apps Script. So back in 2015, when he was at VCU, I was at Longwood, we were both kind of independently doing stuff, and of course I was Googling how to do whatever and found Tom's blog post and, was able to. So definitely, there's a lot of resources out there if you're looking to get started. The documentation that Google provides is fantastic, and there's a lot of great community out there if you want to.
Martin stuff all the time, like unintentionally. So I should really just Google your name first and then add on the strings. But I always end up on your stuff. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so enough of that. Enough of the why. Let's look at the maybe how or what we've done. And so I think we're trying to capture, obviously, I think we mentioned John and Keegan's names before they walked in the door, but they built something awesome. So if you haven't, definitely go back out and check their presentation, because that's a great example of something powerful that you can make with Google Apps Script. But we'll kind of run the gamut of, difficult, complex to simple, and show you all some of what we've done at VCU. And so I built this actually, particularly for this conference. So I used Martin's tags aggregator. Tom set one up a couple of weeks ago to kind of start collecting the tweets from the domain's hashtag. And then so I built out a little front-end web app that basically reads in that sheet, uses it as a data store, and is published to the web. And then we render in this nice kind of GitHub. I realize this is bad color choices here, but there were no good color choices with this data set, so I'm sorry about that. Renders all of this stuff in like a nice GitHub-like commit structure. But again, we've got a ton of data stored in Google Sheets that's serving a not trivial web application that we could really read in and display in any variety of formats. So this is one arbitrary one that I chose based on the limited amount of time I had, and had to slap myself in the face and say, Jeff, don't invest any more time in this than what you're doing.
How long did give an idea?
I would say, how long did it take me to get the data out of Google Sheets? 45 seconds. How long did it take me to find an example of this on the internet and co-opt it to fit together? Maybe an hour and a half of time, I guess, on Sunday evening. And again, I could have gotten way more involved and, using my better judgment, decided not to. But we'll put up this example presentation later. We'll send it to the Reclaim folks and make sure that this is hosted there so you can play around with it. And it's actually live, and there's a version out in CodePen that you can play around with if you're so interested. But an example of, hey, we've got a fairly complex data set in Google Sheets that we're using to make any kind of arbitrary visualization that we want. So very powerful. Essentially with the click of a button. All I did was publish it to the web. I didn't even grab the JSON values. I just read it in straight through CSV with D3. So zero transformation on that end. But an example of something, I think, on the more complex end of the spectrum. But it can also do absurd things like this right here. And I'll let Tom talk about. Tom's apparently been subverting, what did we call it? Obfuscation. Yes, digital obfuscation or something like that. Tim's been subverting Twitter for quite some time with Google Sheets.
This was, probably spurred by 2 or 3 years ago, or I don't know, a number of years ago, maybe 2016, back when I was learning how to do this and learning how to do APIs. And I was like, I can connect the Twitter API and the YouTube API, and my stupid example was to look at how often Gangnam Style has been viewed, and then log it in a spreadsheet and tweet it out weekly. And as you can see, it's been doing that since 2016. So I have a giant spreadsheet of Gangnam Style's data from the from the YouTube API, and going out to any of you who follow weekly, and it amuses me still. So if you're easily amused, there is an endless array of things you can do, and this is just one of them. And just stupid, but fun and beautiful, and you can create it and just let it go. I don't care. It's Google's data. I hope it eats all the data.
Yeah. And I think we ran Tom's Twitter handle.
Because it would be nice to see the tweets with the trends visualized.
Yeah. I mean, and I've considered it, and it's there if you wanted to build a data visualization of the changes. I have considered it at times, but like Jeff said earlier, like, the thing about this is you have to control yourself.
Yeah.
Like, I keep wanting to go do dumber and dumber things. That, take more time. Like, that is my want. But I have to be like,
We got to rein it in. Yeah. And so just another funny thing along the obfuscation thing is I think we ran Tom's Twitter handle through a bot or not service, which determined with some sort of confidence interval whether you were human or a robot. And Tom was 97% robot. And we can see the automated tweets, I think, example one of why. But hey, so if you're looking to confuse Twitter, make it think you're a robot, fantastic and easy way. We've got a GitHub repo linked in here with a bunch of example scripts where I'm sure you can pull that one. And so something in the similar vein, I think ironically around the same time, still before we actually started working together, I started every hour collecting weather data on Farmville, Virginia, where I'm from. And so I think when I looked at this spreadsheet before publishing this chart, I think I was at about 30,000 rows of data that this thing has just chugged along every hour. And I think over 3 or 4 years now, I've gotten maybe like one failure notification that it's failed to connect to this API for whatever reason. So when you think about low barrier things that you can kind of just set and forget, this is definitely one of them. We've both let these things chug away for going on 3 or 4 years now. 0 interruptions. It's not complaining about how much data we have. There's no maintenance involved. And I could have this is actually an embed of the chart, which takes a long time to render because obviously it's got, going on 100,000 data points on there. But you could put wherever you want and have a nice updating automatic chart that Google Sheets just basically curates for you. So now we'll start kind of getting into some of the stuff we've done in the recent past at VCU regarding Google Apps Script and Google Sheets. So I think the first one we'll get is this example of us trying to collect some cover your ass data regarding our consultation minutes. So we've had a couple of leadership changes over the last couple of years. And I think naturally, we want to be as proactive as we can about collecting the data regarding how we're providing service and who we're providing it to in regards to our consultation minutes. And so we have been very proactive in trying to set up systems. So when somebody randomly pops in and is like, I need this data for a presentation on Friday. That was a decent impression, but this isn't recorded, right? When they pop in and ask us for data, we can turn it around and it doesn't have to be a big panicked thing. So what we've done is we've tried to set up and create systems that allow us to kind of just do that without creating another bottleneck in our workflow. So what we did here is we wrote a script, put it in a Google spreadsheet, and we created a separate calendar where we put all of our appointments that we have with faculty members. So anytime we schedule anything with faculty members, somebody comes into our open office hours, we pop it on this calendar, and then that spreadsheet has a trigger that fires every night at like 11:30 or whatever, and goes through, loops through all the calendar events for that day, pulls them all into the spreadsheet, kind of catalogs them for us, and then generates this nice up-to-date chart. And so we can really, from this data, it's obviously live updated, so we could produce this at a moment's notice anytime we want to. And so it's been really nice. And again, this is one of those things where like you've got to kind of like check it just to make sure, because like it doesn't complain. It's clearly been running this entire time. So every once in a while, I'll just be like, all right, let me just pop in there and make sure it's still chugging along. And again, we can see this is, I think we made it just about a year ago now. So we're almost through this fiscal year. And, we've got nice charts that go up that we can use to justify our existence to VCU. And so if you want an example, there's a link to that particular script on the GitHub repo. But again, the steps are fairly straightforward. We just go out to the calendar, grab the particular events on that day. It does some breaking apart, some parsing of the dates to figure out how many minutes we spent with a particular person, then multiplies that by the amount of people in the room on our team, and then gives us this nice thing.
Very important. Do the multiplication.
Exactly. Yeah.
Two people.
Cumulative charts.
Wow.
Yep. Cumulative charts.
Make your charts go up.
Yep. That's all they really want to see.
That's how you bill people, right?
And so one of the other things that I think we've learned throughout this process, especially with dealing with Google, is that there's a lot of these weird undocumented things that we bump into every once in a while that we don't know exist, that are either helpful or destroy projects in their tracks. And so we'll kind of talk about some lessons learned that we've had through a social work portfolio capstone class. And so I'll give you kind of an example of what we've been working towards. So this is for the BSW program, and this is part of their senior capstone experience. They all have to complete a reflective portfolio, and they've chosen to do that through Google Docs. And so what they've done, the two faculty members that we're working with, have created essentially a folder hierarchy that represents this portfolio, and then inside of each folder, subfolders, there are particular documents that explain to the student, what prompt they're given, what types of pieces of work represent, that competency. Then the students have access to their individual Google folder for some period of time, and then they would eventually, at the end of the semester, we go back through and remove access from the students. The faculty members evaluate it. So what we've been working towards is they provide us with this one kind of master folder, and then we go ahead and loop through a spreadsheet of students and duplicate that folder structure and all of those Google Docs for, I think we had 120 students. And then eventually, like you said, the students go upload their stuff, they do their work, and then at the end, we went back through and removed the students as collaborators on all of the folders to kind of take away their ability to continue to manipulate the stuff. And so I think this is, year 3? And I'll let kind of Tom explain the evolution of this.
So year 1 was the usual pattern, right? Just short time frame, fear about whether I could do this correctly or not. And I eventually worked it out, and I tested it with, I think, making 3 copies. Worked great. So, and this is a nested kind of monstrosity.
Yeah.
And it's gotten a lot better.
Yes.
He used to have full multiple sentences in the folder names.
And far more documents, far more folders.
Yeah, so we started off super huge, and then it came down to the day of to do this, and I think it was 120, 150, and after, let's say, 3.5 copies, it timed out. So I have 3 good copies and a copy that failed someplace in the middle. I run it again, same thing happens. And so I completely freak out and, then have to figure out, what am I going to do to get all these things, and ended up doing some really ridiculous stuff. So time is a factor in Google Scripts in copying nested and sub-nested folders that are really expensive, costly, time-wise process with this, it seems. It would have been easier, I think, to create them from scratch. Anyway, learned that one round. Dealt with that sort of stuff. Second round, I'm trying to remember what happened. Something else.
I think we might have just gone the other direction. We just upload a giant thing using the desktop GUI.
Yeah.
We went around, yeah.
Yeah.
I used PTSD from the first
AppleScript to create the structures and duplicate them on the desktop, and then threw them all in Google Drive, and then did the sharing loop through the Google script. So as you can see, I mask incompetence with great degrees of weird things. And then Jeff came, and I think we finally gotten down to it.
And so, yeah, I think this time we had the lesson learned of, oh wait, there's a timeout here. This won't just churn indefinitely.
Yeah.
So that one was, we call it in our office, we call it the blood price. So Tom had to pay the blood price for that knowledge that we've all learned and become better from. And we also really encourage the faculty members. We're like, hey, this structure, like, you can simplify this without losing anything pedagogically. And so we really leaned on them a little bit to, I think, pare down stuff in a useful way. And so I think what we did this time is we had essentially a coordination spreadsheet. So we had a Google spreadsheet, and we added a column for whether or not the stuff had been copied, and then wrote one function to essentially do the copying, but that would loop through the spreadsheet, I think at 5 or 10 minute intervals. So every 5 minutes it would go to the spreadsheet, find the next row that hadn't been completed yet, copy that student stuff, and then stop executing the script. And then it would just kind of continue on like that until everything was copied, which I think, I want to say I kicked it off at about like 5 p.m. one night, and maybe like 3 or 4 hours later it had churned through all of the student templates without issue. Although there are some weird stuff, and like if you start playing around with this, there is a very real possibility that you totally explode your Google Drive with files inadvertently, because I think that's definitely what happened with this, since we had the panicked faculty member log in and be like, WTF, you know?
Right. That was one of the things we noticed too, is like the behavior of Google Drive between years is not necessarily the same. So like when we would share it with people, like he didn't want it to pollute his main view, you know, so you get into some weird stuff. And the way that shared population worked between years changed.
Yeah.
And like I still have these things littered all over my Google Drive from like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And we have backup copies like on random flash drives that I come across every so often.
Mm-hmm. But so just some warnings if you do decide to mess around with this stuff. They may be unintended consequences.
Yeah, get a generic account if you can, or a team account, and be that person when you do this. That way you don't end up with unexpected file gifts.
Correct. Cool. So I think one of the things that we like to do in our office is we'll like plot some random thing, and we were just doing it downstairs with the Twitter stuff. We're like, can we make this in Google Sheets? And then eventually we kind of like challenge ourselves. And we're like, yeah, we're gonna try and make this in Google Sheets. So what I'd hope to do is we put out a bunch of calls on Twitter about things that you all might want to see us automate, or like individual pieces of workflow that we might be able to kind of help you build live if they are self-contained enough. So what I like to do now is kind of switch gears. Now that you all have seen a couple of examples of the kinds of things that we've built, I'm going to switch gears, and I'm actually going to pop over into Google Drive, and we'll open up the script editor on a spreadsheet, kind of walk you through the basics of creating a really bare bones, simple Google Apps script program that'll just send an email. So I think we've got some, what time does this start? 3:15 we're over?
That's right.
Yep. So we got about a half an hour to do some of that stuff, and that'll take about 10 minutes. So while I'm doing that, I'll kind of walk through some concepts that I think are important for you to know as you get started with this stuff. If you got a computer, feel free to get it out, log in your Google account if you have one. If you don't, that's fine. You can totally look on. But while you're doing that, be thinking about how could you use this. I'm also going to go ahead and just open up. I'm just going to do a quick Google search for Google Apps Script, and then the first thing that pops up should be this developers.google.com link for Apps Script. I'm going to open up the reference, because one of the things that I think is really important and I look for as I do more web development stuff is I like to find technologies that have really good documentation, really good examples. And so if they do, then that makes my process of getting started a whole lot easier. And it also helps me realize what are the costs and benefits of using something like this versus something else. And so if we open up this G Suite services dropdown, you can see that there are basically kind of helper libraries that Google has already created to interact with all of these different G Suite services. So Gmail, Calendar, Drive, Documents, all of these things, we can do. And if, nobody has a spark of inspiration, I can certainly suggest something. We can just play around, and you all can tell me what you want me to build, and we'll try and do that. Sound cool? Yep. All right. So to get rolling, I'm just going to open up Google Drive, and I'm going to open up a new Google Sheet. And it's worth mentioning that the script editor that I'm about to show you is actually attached to any of the G Suite types, right? So you could create documents, and this process would be very similar. But I've got a spreadsheet here. We'll just call this Playground. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Tools and then open up Script Editor. And what this is going to do is it's going to generate us a new Google Apps Script project. We'll just call this Mail for right now. And so this is what the script editor looks like. And again, you know, if we're talking about an easy introduction to doing development work, this is great. It provides you, pre-provisions you an environment, gives you loggers, debuggers, all of the stuff that you need without really having to think about what any of that stuff means. So I think there are a couple of really kind of key concepts that we need to know to get started working with Google Apps Script. And really, I think those are as simple as variables, functions, and arrays. I'm not going to go through all three of those at once, and we'll kind of, during the process, write a couple out. But it's also worth noting, anybody do any JavaScripting? Okay, so just a couple hands. So that's really good, because Google Apps Script is basically JavaScript written in this Google Apps Script editor. So all of the syntax should be the same, and if it has most of the language features that JavaScript has already. So if you're like, how do I do this? You can just look up JavaScript code, and it will pretty much be the same thing. So variables, yeah.
Does it make like a decent way to begin playing around and learning JavaScript and then be able to just take this code, you know, whatever code gets generated, you know, and rather than run it in Google, just copy the code and go make a JavaScript file?
I would say, to the first part of your question, yes. Is this a good way to start learning JavaScript? I would say absolutely. And like I said, I think for both Tom and I, this is really our first introduction to like meaningful JavaScript stuff. The second part, probably not, because I think what we do in Google Apps Script is, like I said, we use a lot of these helper libraries that Google has created for us already that don't necessarily exist in the browser. And they're trying to do two different things, right? Most of JavaScript written in the browser, handles interactivity. I click this button, then something happens, where in Google Apps Script, we're not really doing that, and we're using it more to orchestrate some of these helper functions that Google has already created. So yes and no, if that makes sense.
Same functions, same ideas, same concepts, but this has the kind of built-in things that I think makes it more functional for you faster. So, because they've already built these crazy things that you can hook into.
It can be kind of like a rapid prototyping.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Switch over to some other Java entity, script entity.
And you could also take it, and wherever you're using Google Apps Script, you could sort of highlight those sections for yourself, at least mentally, and then use Google APIs instead of the App Script to tap into the Google API, which is sort of the externally facing version of their app scripts, which are internally facing.
Okay.
So you can do the same things externally with JavaScript. It's just harder.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So cool. Any other questions before we get rolling? So I got there, I opened up a new Google Sheet, went to Tools, Script Editor, that opened something that looked like this. Okay? So I think the first key kind of concept we're going to look at is a variable. Now, whenever we do any kind of programming, a variable is a really important concept. And all that really does is store a reference to another piece of data. So it could be like an email string, like I've defined here. It could be another piece of data that I've gotten in from a Google form. It could really be anything at that point, but we just need to use them to kind of represent relationships between pieces of data. So what I'll do is I'm going to go back in here into my function, and we're just going to go ahead and do, since our script is ultimately going to use the Gmail app to send an email, I'll just declare a variable using the var keyword, and then what I want to call the variable, an equal sign, and then some quotation marks. And I'll go ahead and put my VCU email in there. And so I'm going to hop out here real quick because I always like referencing documentation as I'm doing stuff. We'll go ahead and I'm going to open up the Gmail app real quick. And we'll look at that and we'll find a nice function in there that's going to help us send an email. So we'll go ahead and look at this one. So mail app, send email. And that's going to take three pieces of data to actually make that work, right? We've got the recipient, which is an email address, the subject, and then a body. So I'm going to hop back in here and I'm going to declare two more variables that reference those things. So we'll do another one. from domains. And then we'll do body equals howdy. All right. So I've got all of that stuff. So the second piece of kind of like little bit of programming knowledge I think we need to wrap our heads around to start to use this stuff effectively is the idea of what a function is. So if we hop back into our code editor here, we can see that Google Script has kind of pre-generated a function for us and just called it my function. Now a function, if you've kind of talked about this concept in mathematics, it's fairly similar. It's just a procedure that's going to run that we can reuse across different pieces of our code. Sometimes it can take input, it doesn't have to, but then it's going to do something with it. So in this example, I made a function called send some emails. It takes in 3 pieces of data, email, subject, body, and then what it's going to do is it's just going to call that Gmail app.sendEmail function that I found from the Google Helper library with those 3 pieces of data. And so what this would allow us to do is really reuse parts of our code. So we could create this function that we're going to use in multiple different places so that we don't have to redo this every time. And then we'll define the function. So that's this part up here where we say function, name it, tell it what it's going to take in, and then tell it what it does. And then down here we actually call the function to run that code. So really at this point, I think I'll be able to kind of hop in there and we can do that right below this. So we can define a new function, call it send some emails. And we know that needs to take in the email, the subject, and the body. And we'll open up some curly braces. And then we're going to call Gmail app. And see, this is the autocomplete that Tom started mentioning. So once I define one of the, yeah, exactly, it's fantastic. And so once I start defining one of that Google Helper libraries and I do a dot, it's going to tell me all of the functions that exist on that Gmail app that I can use. So we can see here that there's a ton of stuff. Like you can create drafts, delete labels, get aliases, get chat threads, all this stuff. And so we're just going to kind of come down here, keep scrolling through, and we're going to look for send email. And then the nice thing is it will tell you what functions exist, and it will also tell you what kind of data they need as an input to make that function work. So we've got recipient, subject, and body. So we'll go ahead, use that, then it fills that in for us. So we'll go ahead and swap out some of these references to the variables that we've named. So email, subject, body, semicolon. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save.
Real quick, Jeff, that's something I didn't understand at the beginning, right? Like that when you put these variables in the function, like the name's not really important. It's just the order, right? Like, and it seems like when you're first learning this, like you keep thinking there are rules that don't exist, right? Like, oh, I called it my function. I guess I must leave it that way.
Yeah.
But like you can change all this stuff, and it's just like, when you first wander in, it's easy for people who've been doing this for a long time not to realize, like, you didn't realize that. Like, this could say, foo, Jerry, and dog, and it would work the same way. It's just the order of the entry that matters.
I feel like we need to do that now.
I'll just make things more confusing.
Foo.
Can I ask you a question while you're doing
Yeah,
it?
please.
Since you set your variables as specific email addresses and everything, why would we need this for just that? When those are very specific, why don't I just click send email? You know what I mean? Like new email do for one person.
I think this is just a super simple example. Okay. This is never something I would actually build.
Okay.
I think typically, that's a really good question. I think typically what we might do in this case is we would get that variable from somewhere else, right? We would go and we would look in a spreadsheet that has a bunch of rows of email addresses and get that from the spreadsheet. Maybe this is a Google form. Somebody submits and we want to run a piece of code when they submit the form to the spreadsheet. And an email is a variable in that payload that we get from the form. But fantastic question. Anybody else have questions? Clarifications? Okay. So,
Shouldn't you go back and, on your bar statements, change to food and dairy?
I could. I don't have to, because I think that's kind of part of what Tom mentioned is what I call these things that I'm passing into the function doesn't really matter as long as inside the function they're referenced the same way. So as long as these things, the arguments that I give the function, are named the same inside the function, I can have them be called different things.
Yeah, so right now it's just defining the function, but when he actually calls the function.
Yep. Then I'll pass
I
in.
think we're keeping the same thing as me, that the previous function was related to this, which these are two separate functions.
Right, yeah.
The first one is my function,
Right.
the second one is something
I
else.
missed that.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Sure, and we'll go ahead and I think hopefully this will clarify some things. So now we've defined our function up there. Now I'm going to call that function using the 3 variables that I've defined above that. So we've called our function something else. So we'll do that. Open up our parentheses, and then I'll pass it in email, subject, and then body. And then I'll close that with a semicolon. I'll go ahead and save that out. Okay.
It's important to note that those things will change to blue if you got them right.
Correct.
Your variables will change blue. So if they're like not blue, then you probably either capitalized something you shouldn't have, or you made some other mistake.
And now there is a point where that stops happening.
That's true.
You know, like after a certain point of nesting, I think the script editor just forgets the references, but that's a solid thing to point out, and I really appreciate that, because yes, if they are blue most of the time, it means that you're referencing a variable that exists. And so we can change that to something, and we see that it's just black like that. So we'll go ahead and bring this back to email. And we'll save that one more time. And then sort of run this. What we can do is we could actually define, we see my function kind of wraps all of this stuff. So when I click run, what it's going to do is it's going to run my function, and then that's going to run all the code inside of that. So we could have multiple functions in here, and they would all be kind of available from this drop-down menu. So I'm just going to leave it as my function, and then we've got this run button over here that should actually run all of this code. And so I'm going to do that, and this first time it's most likely going to ask me to authorize this script to make actions on my behalf using my Google resources. So we'll do that. Authorization needed. Ask to review permissions. Depending on what you ask for, it will show you scarier and scarier messages to like kind of dissuade you from doing this. So maybe we can see what an example of that looks like. Right here, it just says, hey, we want to read, compose, send, and permanently delete all your email from Gmail. So like I said, they're really trying to say, this is the scope of, permissions that you're giving to this script. And technically, yes, we could do all of those things if we scripted them out. So I'm just going to click allow. That should do it. It's going to run that function. And then if I got all of my stuff right, if we hop back over to my email, we see that I got that hey from domain sent from my Gmail address. And that's always going to be when you authorize scripts to do stuff, the person who owns the Google document, the person who sends the email or whatever, is always going to be the person who authorized that script to run. So especially if you're doing stuff with collaboration between Gmail personas, I guess, that's always something to keep in mind. And definitely if it's like something you're doing for your team, that's why having those kind of team accounts are really helpful, because then it's, BSW at VCU, which was the Bachelor of Social Work, sending emails, and not Jeff and not Tom who owned this stuff, which really helped with kind of managing some of that stuff. So that's a basic example. Anybody else got any kind of thing interesting they want us to try now? We got about 20 minutes left. I'm really good at sitting in silence and staring at people, so yeah.
This is just a more technical question.
Sure.
The BSW thing, is that a Google group, or do y'all will actually create a account, like an email?
That, I believe, is a separate account. We're not the managers of the G Suite resources, and if we were, we could do a lot more cool stuff, because they've shut off all of our Google API fancy stuff.
Yeah, a lot of times you'll create a generic account, and we've actually tried to encourage that with people, in part because if the owner of certain documents and things leaves, then the panicked transfers at the end inevitably have some failures. So if we can get them to start off and give ownership to a generic account, they don't have to worry so much about that bird leaving the nest.
And that generic account can be a Google group, or?
Yeah, and it can be
Is it a
associated
kit-
with a team drive, I think, but
AppScript will only run with
Yeah.
a Google Gmail account, and it cannot be team drives.
okay.
Yeah, and I don't think it can be. I'm not. Those are distinctions. I'm not 100%
Yeah,
on.
and we're talking about, I think, a variety of things. So can you associate one of those generic accounts with a team drive? I think because it's just a regular account. And then there's the team drive itself, and then there's can you use the...
Yeah, because if you like try to even do a Google form that takes in like a file, and you try to put that in team drive, it doesn't work. It
Yeah.
runs AppScript. So because the AppScript has to be owned by a user in G Suite. So the generic email address could be a part of a Google group, but you have to have a separate Gmail account to do that.
Okay, good questions. Anybody else? Like I said, great at staring in silence. So somebody come up with something. Yeah.
Have you guys thought of going to like script.google.com and creating a library and then sharing that with people so you have all of your different Google scripts that you would use and then you could reference back to them really quickly, copy paste, that kind of stuff?
No.
No.
And I think not because that doesn't sound like an awesome idea. I just think there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know existed, that being one of them. So
And the second question, have you started using or tried out AppMaker yet?
they actually shut that off for us on VCU. Yeah, it is really unfortunate, and I think that was because of the cloud SQL thing. Like, it didn't want us to spin up the SQL database, although that looks pretty sweet, and I'm kind of disappointed.
We use it at St. Norbert. It works very well. And the Cloud SQL instances are like $10 a month. It's not anything because you just don't need some supercomputer to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's it's great because then you can build up the interface.
Yeah, and I think that's the
Yeah,
that's the
it's
benefit.
Like do relational stuff, which is really hard to do in a spreadsheet. So.
Mm-hmm. And I have some examples where I've hacked together some like relational stuff.
You should show that.
Yeah, I can. This is. Let me see. How do I even get to that? Let's just go to my website. If it still works.
I checked on it not too long.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, so this is an example of like a proof of concept I did, I guess, back in 2017, where what we really wanted to do was have this like lightweight application that would allow people to like register and vote for open idea submissions. And it was like an open IDEO contest that the Da Vinci Center at VCU wanted to run. And I'm not sure if we ended up actually building anything for it. But we talked about doing it in WordPress, and then I think we decided to do it here. But either way, so I'll kind of do a fake email maybe. We'll register with a fake email.
And this is one of those things, we built this, or
Yeah.
Jeff built this for no real reason other than we got going on it, because we could have done it in WordPress pretty easily.
We'll see. I'm getting some sort of errors, so I haven't looked at this in a while.
And then we decided, wouldn't it be funny if you
That's
did it
probably
entirely
already
there?
taken.
I think it may be tied to just VCU emails. That's what I want.
No, they're definitely mad at Damon.com. Yeah, so this, and that's the fate of some of this stuff. If you don't check up on it, no telling why this isn't working. And I'll kind of figure it out later. But we can see that I foolishly did that, where I was like, let me see if I can force a relational model onto Google Sheets. And sure enough, I did. There was some like base level of authentication, a table for ideas, a table for votes, kind of join the stuff between the registered users and ideas. So advisable, probably not. Possible, yeah. It worked for some period of time. I'm kind of disappointed it didn't now. But yeah, something that you could do. And again, probably like why they realized, hey, we should make this app maker thing, because there are certain instances where I think this stuff works really well. But once you get beyond a certain point of complexity, the app maker stuff would solve a lot of problems.
They used it for like the past 10 years inside of Google because people would think, I need this application, and engineers would be like, I'm building search, I don't have time to build your application.
Yeah.
So let's build a platform to make it easy.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's really
And so this used a lot of the same kind of techniques that I think Keegan and John did with their piece, where we have this published as a web app somewhere, running some front end code that talks to the sheet on the back end. So a lot of really, really cool stuff that's possible if you want to explore the fringes and get a little bit deeper into the making part of it. Cool. So let's hop back in here. Anything else I can show you? Send an email. Should we talk about maybe make out a really quick Google form and intercept some Google form input and do something with it?
Yeah, or grab something out of the spreadsheet maybe in the feed.
Yeah.
Worth noting, you can also create your own custom functions, that run in there just like the regular Google functions. Now it's somewhat problematic that everything's called a function, it seems like, but when you do like equals sum in this, you can create your own custom ones through Google Scripts, which can sometimes be, really handy, especially if you're doing really nasty, like if-then statements or weird stuff with regex to pull out pieces. But you can clean up data and manipulate text in some really beautiful ways without necessarily having to get super into the kung fu of some really bizarre stuff that you have to do on the front end.
Yeah. So I think a really good example, and I think also on my blog, there's a solid, retrieve rows from Google Spreadsheet with Google Apps Script. So that's the nice thing is like there's a ton of resources available that, like I said, a lot of people in this room blog a lot about Google Apps Script, but also from the documentation that you can get at, it'll show you how to do some of this stuff. So I just populated this spreadsheet with some basic data, and then we'll go ahead and I'll write a new function called grab spreadsheet data. And then what I'll do is I'm going to use, instead of using the Gmail app, there is a spreadsheet app. Again, when I get that dot, I can do some cool stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the active sheet. And then I'll just get all of the values. Get data range is what it's called.
You can see what Jeff just did when it stopped autocomplete
Yep.
and failed that man.
I just back out. Yep.
Yeah, and so you just erase and start over. Also, don't name your variables or functions anything you can't spell consistently. Accessibility or something like that.
So in this kind of one-liner, I'll just get the data and assign it to this variable called data. So we call the spreadsheet app. It gets the active sheet, meaning the one that this is tied to, that this script is tied to. And then I'm just using this get data range to get values, which basically just, if we look at the spreadsheet as like a big chunk of cells, right? It's just going to get the maximum extent of your columns, the maximum extent of your rows, and then give you all of those values back. In a format that looks kind of like a spreadsheet using JavaScript arrays, which is the last piece here that I haven't gotten to yet. But arrays are basically just comma-separated lists of data, and they exist in most common programming languages. Sometimes they're called something differently, like maybe lists in like Python or whatever, but this is what an array looks like. And so what we're going to get back when we do this is an array of arrays. So we'll get back one big array that contains the whole spreadsheet, and then each row will be a comma-separated list of the data that is in that row, kind of in the same order. And then the one thing, if you do some of this stuff, the one thing that is super tricky to wrap your head around when you start working with arrays and building stuff with spreadsheets is that this is how we would access a value in an array. So I've got this list of comma-separated values. Say I want to just grab Jeff's email out of it. I'm going to use this square brackets notation and then pass in a number that is the index of the item in the array. But everything starts at 0 in programming land. Most things do. So if I want to get the first thing, it's at the 0th position. 1 would be Tom, so on and so forth, like that. But that again is one of those concepts that's like took me forever to wrap my head around. I was like, why is it like this? And so, like with a lot of things that are language based, it's just an arbitrary decision that at some point somebody made. So you got to kind of just accept it. But we'll hop back in here into this. And then now that we've got this, I'm actually just going to use this logger function. So I'm going to call logger.log. And then we'll log the data to the Google Spreadsheet logger. We'll save it. And then again, now that I've got a separate function in here, I can select that one from my drop-down menu, click grab spreadsheet data, go ahead and run it. It'll do that. And then again, now I've changed the scope of my permissions. I've asked to get stuff from the spreadsheet. So it's going to make sure I'm aware of that, make me authorize again with that increased scope. And then I'm going to click allow. And then that should run. And then if I go click view, logs, we can see that. Oh, that's not what I wanted. But, oh well. So that, get values. See, misspelling. So that got me the first value. I wanted to get all the values. So make sure, yeah, I mean, it's going to interpret what you say literally and not your intent. So we'll run that again. Click logs, and there we've got that 2D array, right? So we've got that first row that is the headers, name and job. Then we've got an array for the first row, Jeff, web developer, Tom, awesome guy, Matt, web developer. And so that's a really easy way that we can start to read in some data from a spreadsheet. And then now we'll kind of complicate this a little bit. I'm actually going to hop over here. I'm going to delete out Tom and Matt. And what we'll do is, since we had this question, we'll switch it up a little bit. We'll change this to my email. And then what we'll do is we'll get this data out. And then we'll, in here, kind of mash our two functions together, right? We'll come over here and I'm going to comment this stuff out, if it will let me. Oh, I guess I can just do that. Do this. So data. This is going to be my email address, or at least it should. And then we'll go ahead and I'm actually going to Gmail app.send email. Email, and then we'll just define our subject and stuff right here. And then we'll go ahead and run that one more time. See if it doesn't get angry at us. And then I should, here in a second, get that second email. So, you know, kind of an example of how we'd mash the two together. Go out to a spreadsheet, grab some data, and then come back in. And I'll show you kind of one more helpful thing that we've kind of used in a couple of the examples, the idea of how to set a trigger. Where is that now? That's
clock underneath.
Oh yeah, okay. So one of the really cool things about this is the ability to set different types of triggers that will make these functions run. Either time-based triggers or action-based triggers. And so to do that, we can go ahead and click on this clock icon. That's going to open up a fancier looking interface with all of the different triggers that we have established for this particular Google Apps Script project. So to add a trigger, we just click add a trigger, and then we choose which function we want to run. That I would just leave as the default from the event source, and then we can say, do we want it to be, you know, from the spreadsheet, from time driven? You know, there's a couple of different options here. And so we could set, you know, like a minutes timer and run this every 5 minutes. And then this is also how we could specify how often we want to be notified about failures, depending on how often the script runs. And so if you want to be notified right away, because you're still testing it, definitely remember to click notify me immediately. So as soon as this thing fails, it'll send you an email saying, hey, this script failed to run, here's why. So you can kind of go into it. And then we click save. And then again, that's going to be something that just kind of runs in the background and churns away just like the Gangnam Style and Farmville weather examples from here until eternity. It's also kind of appealing to think like 60 years from now, then your Twitter account will still be like posting out Gangnam Style stuff.
I have every post ever written publicly on our Rampage's multi-site in a Google spreadsheet that continues to grow. I'm not sure how that fits into GDPR, but you know, I did it. I guess, yeah, like 5-6 years ago.
I think I used Tom's work on that to send myself my own posts from my website, but then I run a code like this that counts the words in each post that I write and counts all the words in a Google folder if I'm writing like an article or something, and then sends me an email at the end of each day saying you wrote 500 and something words today.
Oh, that's cool.
Most of the emails say you wrote 0 words today.
Well, I think that idea, you can scratch any itch you have pretty much, and you can do it in a variety of ways. This is just one of them. And, you know, like I said, it's not an investment of your life. You can learn this stuff. I have full confidence anyone here can do this. It takes a little work sometimes, but like it's very accessible.
And there's a couple like 5-minute kind of quick start guides that exist on this Google Apps Script reference site that are worth checking out if you're interested in learning more, that would kind of walk you through some of the basics that we just did and probably really recreate them. So again, hopefully, I think we're getting down to about 5 minutes left, so we'll probably switch over to questions now and whatever, but hopefully this has been useful for you all, kind of as like a gentle introduction to maybe using some Google Apps Script to help automate boring parts of your job, or help to create really quick and easy disposable learning tools that can do a variety of really cool things.
Real quick. Oh, sorry. No, go ahead, Keith. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. I was going to ask if you think that's the best place to start in terms of like learning the app script itself. I'm just thinking in terms of like not knowing what you don't know. It's the same challenge for students when we give them domains at the onset of they just like don't necessarily know what to create, and so in the process of creating, and even then, but like so what's that like initial like place to start to spark people's imaginations to then like have inspirations themselves?
I think it's that thing. It's like, do you do anything in Google?
That you can define. That's you can clearly define and you repeat often.
Yeah, like I have a hash based on tagging my email. It logs it all, so I can graph all the support emails. Why? Because I didn't want to do it by hand, and I wanted as least thought as possible. To me, it always starts with a problem. And it's just, in this case, you contain it to like, is it coming in through a Google form? Is it involved with my mail if I use Gmail? Or does it have something to do with these documents or a spreadsheet or whatever? I mean, I've built WYSIWYG drag and drop kind of editor things that create Google Docs. I've done a million stupid things that I wouldn't have done, but have been presented as like, here's the problem I want to solve. And those are things that it does. Yeah, and I think really where you start would just depend on how you want to learn. I know a lot of people who are like, I kind of like a rigid, and Tom's shaking his head, and the next thing I'm going to say, Tom's definitely going to shake his head at. So you could do that. Like, this is a great place to start if you like really structured experiences. YouTube. There's a ton of videos about how to do all this stuff that are explained through video, that'll walk you through, somebody narrating just like I did, so you can rewind, fast forward. Tom also done live videos, or, like I said, I mean, there's a ton of blogs about this, so you could kind of, those are the most common questions I get is like, somebody finds one of my blog posts and is like, hey, I want to do this like slight variation of this thing you did. And, maybe the code that I have there and like the examples that I provide is like 75 or 85% of what they want to do. And then they've got to kind of like negotiate with other people and like the documentation to get at that extra 15%. So if you prefer unstructured learning, that's what I would say. Just like go out, Google Apps Script, what I want to do, and just see what pops up. And chances are you're going to find something useful from somebody in the community documenting how to do X or Y that you could kind of use to work backwards from. Yeah. Jim, did you?
So one of the things I was interested in is, you are a 3-person group, and you have these often open office hours, and you work with faculty directly. How has this stuff helped you scale what your group can do? Because I'm really interested in how you use these efficiencies to kind of work with as many faculty and students. And like, what are some of those numbers in terms of who you work with that you've been tracking?
Well, I'm going to go back to our Google Apps.
I mean, no one has asked for them. They're just continuing to grow, I guess.
This is how many consultation minutes we've spent. But I think this is a great example because this is a Google Apps Script, like keeping track of some stuff that like we don't really care about that somebody might ask us about one day. So we can be like, here's a chart.
Yeah, it's defensive data.
Yeah.
If at some point somebody says like, what are you doing? I'm just gonna be like, bam. I'm gonna say you have more data now than you could possibly like.
Go have fun with it.
Let me know how this goes.
We do the same thing in our office. It's the defensive data collection, and it's almost the exact same thing.
I think of the hours that we spend writing reports that really answer other people's questions, not the ones we care about.
Mm-hmm.
They want to know, How many students this semester came in and asked for help with their domain? Were they resolved? Who helped them?
And some of that stuff you might not even need a script for. Like that, you could probably just tie to a form and structure in the right way, and the responses thing would chart all of that for you without doing any of this. I think this was just a way for us to like, one, we had a scheduling problem. We were like, we need to schedule stuff. So can we now take that as an artifact of something we've done and chart it? But I would say, yeah, like, I mean, that's a really good example. I think we tend to use this to like cut out the meaningless stuff that we have to do, the drudgery.
Personally, we cut out the meaning stuff. I think where it becomes particularly valuable perhaps to the institution, which I don't care about a whole lot, but like it is nice to help people. Like we helped the student advisor people.
Oh yeah.
We've helped, field placement for social work people get their stuff done. We're saving the university like hundreds of hours of time by automating these tasks that they're doing in the worst ways. That DFW thing for some group we did a while back.
You mean the override form?
Yeah.
Yeah. We had a department who was like manually processing overrides for courses in like the worst way possible. And so we like set it up. You have a Google form that comes in. When they like approve or deny it, you click the row in a spreadsheet. There was a custom menu that was like approve or deny, and that was it. And so it took, they said it was like taking them 30, 45 minutes to do some of this stuff, down to like 3. So to do that at scale across a bunch of stuff should free them up to do supposedly more meaningful engagement.
Well, I hope you all join me in thanking both Tom and Jeff for their work.
Thanks for coming, everybody.